He is Professor of Professional Communication from Clemson University, and he's going to talk to us about why AI is no good, right?
No, not quite that. So, first of all, thank you to the other presenters. Those were really fascinating talks that kind of gave me some ideas, and I'm going to kind of build on. But what I'm going to talk about is kind of two things about AI. One, its general usage outside of generative AI, and kind of where it's gone, and how outside of like ChatGPT and DALL-E and generative AI forms, it's almost become a marketing term that as humanistic researchers or social scientific researchers, I think we have a role in untangling in some way. But also how the discourse around generative AI often is essentially this, right? So GPT-3 was amazing when it hit. Like, the people who act like, oh, well, it's just generating words randomly and whatever, sure. But, like, if you had told me in 2021 that was going to come out, it would have blown my mind, right? Like, we forget. It's so much better than, like, the chatbots we had been used to, if you remember the annoyance of dealing with, like, customer service on something. Like, my God, it was so much better. And GPT-4 was so much better, too. As a second presenter discussed, like, GPT-4, if you've used the paid version, and I've used the paid version very frequently, just to play around with, is so much better than 3. But that has led to this, which is this like understanding of technology is essentially linear, which is the way that popular discourse often presents it, and the way that I've often seen it presented too much by researchers that I've like listened to on the future of essays or the future of like generative AI in research, which is essentially like, oh my God, it has improved so much so quickly that we are going to just keep getting this linear massive jumps in improvement. And I'm here to kind of explain why that might not be the case, because technological improvement is not linear. So the massive jump to GPT-3 and then the massive jump to GPT-4, it is not necessarily assumed or automatic, for reasons that I'll discuss, that you're going to keep seeing those jumps. So in the tech world, you do see stuff like this. So if you don't know what AGI is, that's artificial general intelligence. That's like the artificial intelligence we're talking about in movies, like the actual, like, can think artificial intelligence. And you see graphics like this, like at this rate of improvement, like, oh my God. But the problem is, things don't improve at that rate. No technology improves at that rate. You do not see just a consistent massive jump after massive jump. You often have breakthroughs, and I'll get into why that's important for humanities, but also for essay writing and things like that. Because there is a discourse of like, GPT-4 is good, right? It's not the best though. It's better than like an 18-year-old student's paper. It's not better than like an amazing paper that you've read. Like, go read like movie scripts produced by AI. Like, even GPT-4, like, they're not that good. But there's often an idea in that discourse that, well, they will be, because it's improved so quickly that, like, it's just going to keep improving. And through this idea of infrastructural literacies, which I'll briefly explain, I'm going to kind of, like, question whether that's necessarily the case, as you have people talking about inevitable futures of artificial general intelligence and all of that. Many of them using, like, very apocalyptic like narratives about like artificial general intelligence, but how like it's somewhat a misunderstanding of how technology progresses, that it does not progress at this steady state. So the two questions I'm going to pose for the future transformative role of AI in the arts and humanities. One, what does AI even mean? In our discussions today, we've been talking about generative AI. And I think we do know what that means. But AI as a more general phrase has become, as I'll get to, a marketing term, into a thing where I don't know what it means, and also I see researchers do the same things, which I understand for grant funding and things like that, but I'll get into that. And two, what will the future of AI, specifically generative AI, so in the second half I'll translate to generative AI, look like considering major infrastructural data challenges? Because I don't know what the future will look like. If I knew what the future would look like, I would have built an AI model myself. But I can say with some confidence that the future is not automatic, and that improvements in the past do not automatically lead to consistent improvements in the future. That's just kind of not the way the history of technology works. And, and there are really significant challenges, specifically generative AI models face in improving generation to generation. So first of all, I'm going to get at the phrase AI. So this is just a Google Trends interest over time in the phrase AI. There's the launch of ChatGPT, and as you can see, and quite understandably, you see a massive jump in just Google searches for AI, articles that feature AI. Very understandable. ChatGPT changed the game. It was a huge deal when it came out. And it had been out before, actually. If you knew how to use APIs, there were developer versions. So you could have played around with GPT-3 before it came out. But that's when it went mainstream, right? And so after that, all anyone wants to talk about is AI. And that has come over to business and has made me ask, does anyone remember the dot-com bubble? So the dot-com bubble was the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a period where companies were just throwing .com onto the end of their name, and it was tripling their value. No, I'm not kidding. They were doing that. They were just throwing .com on their names. Pets.com was valued at $4 billion. And then it crashed, right? Because it was oh, well, these aren't even real businesses. It's just .com. And this is not specific to generative AI, but this is more just how people are using the words AI in general in the business world, and as I'll talk about in a second, in academia sometimes too. But where once ChatGPT hit, everything became AI, including many things that existed well before ChatGPT. We just didn't call AI. And the one that made me really get on this, and maybe I'm just being a grump and saying words should mean something, but what really got on this was this commercial I saw for Amazon and the NBA, and it was using AI to analyze data to prevent player injuries. And I groaned so loudly I scared one of my dogs, because as both kind of a data nerd and an NBA fan, they were doing that in 2010. There were panels at the Sloan conference and using machine learning and algorithms and that in 2010. It's not at all clear to me what about that is AI. And these are just some so there's prevent sports injuries, but once again, they were doing that before everything became AI. Policing with artificial intelligence, we just called that big data policing and surveillance policing before AI. As far as I can tell from actually looking into it, I don't think anything changed about it. Benefits of AI-based travel. I don't even know what that is. But I'm sure that whatever that is just using algorithms to find cheap prices for flights, right? When I looked into it, that's mostly what it was. Those existed. Those are algorithms. Those are machine learning. I don't know why that's AI. Pixel 8 Pro, the first smartphone with AI built in. I tried to do some research on this. No idea what that means. I mean, it has Gemini, I guess. Book recommendations powered by AI. Amazon was making recommendations based on your previous reads in 2003. So it's not clear to me movie recommendations. Here's one that was in a major article in Ad Age Weekly, and it was 7 types of AI marketing tools, right? So chatbots, which, okay, that can be AI, though a lot of those are just trained data models for specific questions that have existed going back to 2012 around. Generative tools, okay, I'll give them that one. Virtual assistants, maybe. Recommender systems certainly existed before. Predictive analytics existed before. Customer segmentation existed going back to the 1910s and the introduction of zip codes in the United States. Sentiment analysis, if you've ever done quantitative discourse analysis, sentiment analysis certainly existed before. So this is not me being a skeptic of AI in general, right? It's just that in a lot of cases it's not clear to me what the term means when businesses are throwing it on everything. When every ad I hear is our new AI solution, for a company, I don't know what that means, and oftentimes it's things that people were doing before. And it also happens in research, which is understandable because people pursue funding, but I've definitely been to talks where people like describe like AI analyses of like literary text, for example, that are machine learning analyses that are like over a decade old. And we just wouldn't have called AI before. Like, is machine learning the same as AI? Like, maybe, I guess, but if that's the case, then machine learning is quite old. Like, algorithmic filtering is quite old. So, like, as researchers, I think, like, generative AI is different. Like, that is a specific thing that I can point to parameters of and data sets. But I do think we should be, like, skeptical when you just hear AI slapped onto many things that it's not at all clear, because they're black boxes, what that means at all. And if they existed before. And when you read research that says it uses AI, I think it's also important to be critical of, does it? And what does AI mean? I mean, I'm not going to answer it for you, because I don't know. But if it is a sentiment analysis, I just reviewed a grant application that was like an AI sentiment analysis, but it wasn't clear to me how that was different than like a corpus linguistic approach that might have gone back like 10 years. I mean, it really kind of like wasn't. So I think like outside of like generative AI, I do think it's important that we like be critical of both how we use the phrase in our own research, but also when we teach students like what it means and how these phrases are being deployed, right? Because it can't be everything, or else it's kind of meaningless and it means nothing. So we need to ask, like, when someone offers you like an, I don't know, AI-powered bus matching app, like, is that AI-powered, or is that just using an algorithm to tell you the closest bus at the closest time? Because that, to me, if that's AI, then I think we need a new phrase, because we're getting way too broad. Now, generative AI, though, which we've been discussing today, like GPT-3, generative image generators, so DALL-E, things like that, that is a much more identifiable, like, actual object of analysis. I know what generative AI is, and that is something that is unique, especially on the scale that it is now, right? Like, unlike, say, a prediction algorithm or big data and policing, something on the scale of ChatGPT or like any of the other solutions like Bard and the ones that aren't as good. Google, by the way, should be embarrassed for launching the one that they launched, and oh my god. But this is an identifiable thing that, as the multiple presenters have discussed, like, is different than what came before. And you can put parameters around it, and you can actually define what it's doing. It is generating original text based on prompts, based on training and based on the data set that it is trained from. So unlike those other examples, like, this is something that's actually identifiable. Which then kind of gets me to like my second point, which is about infrastructural literacies and why it's important to kind of, when we have the opportunity, open up the black box. And black box is just essentially a term for platforms that you don't have access to. And infrastructural researchers in the social sciences and humanities, one of their approaches is to kind of try to dig underneath and figure out like what's going on. And a lot of things are proprietary, so you can't. So I can't tell you why Google is the first AI phone, right? I mean, I have a feeling it's probably not. But like, Google's not going to tell me that, and I can't like access like necessarily the code. But what you can access and understand these data sets and how these work, I think is important for us in understanding the future, because we are talking about a moving target. Like, we are talking about a thing that has progressed rapidly. Like, in 2 years, the improvement, even from, as our second presenter discussed, from GPT-3 to the GPT-4, the improvement is massive and noticeable. And it really is astronomical, going back to that first slide. And what these models need to keep improving is training data. So it needs training data. It learns from massive amounts of data. So this slide kind of cut off, but this was originally like, it compares like the amount of training data that was fed into GPT-4 compared to like the original first launch of GPT-3. And it is a massive, massive scale of data. which gets back to like the environmental impact of just scraping, analyzing, and crunching all that data. The larger it gets, the larger the environmental toll. But the point is, it's a huge amount of data it needs to improve and keep learning. And it needs more data to keep learning, right? Like, that's how these things learn. You feed more data into them, they're supposed to get better, okay? That's how GPT-3 was such a big jump from like the beta versions. That's how GPT-4 was such a big jump from GPT-3. Now, one problem it faces, though, is there are worries in some of the AI, generative AI like circles, especially some of the business ones, that they're running out of data. So we think of like, oh, well, there's like an unlimited amount of data to train a model on, but that's actually not true, considering how huge GPT-4's data set is. So scraping the internet, they're running out of books to digitize. They've scraped Reddit, Wikipedia, all the data sources. And it's trained right now up to what, like 2001 or 2022, I believe now, is where the data set goes up to. One of the problems they face, and why there are some significant worries that the exponential growth we've seen will not continue to be exponential, is that it is quickly coming up on November 30th, 2022, as far as its data set goes. What happened on November 30th, 2022?
Yeah.
GPT-3 came out, right? And once GPT-3 came out, then you saw an explosion of low-quality AI content. If any of you are on Quora, so I get my email every morning for like history answers, and increasingly like they're not the bad racist answers. They're not the US or China's propaganda answers. They're like pretty good answers that I can tell are written by GPT-4. But they're not the great answers either. But increasingly Quora content, Reddit content, all of that stuff, simple website content is generated through generative AI. So that then becomes part of the data set. So there are worries that essentially there will never be as pure a data set to train a model on as there was in that initial training. Because as soon as you hit a point where you have a lot of AI-generated content online being fed into the data set, because part of what makes these data sets so successful and so huge, and this is not like me being like a doomer about like generative AI, I'm not saying it won't continue to improve, just that it is very possible, and there is significant worry in some generative AI communities that it will not continue to improve at the current rate, or at nearly the current rate. Because you have this thing called synthetic data, and synthetic data is essentially training generative AI on generative AI. And people are working really hard on improving the success of synthetic data in generative AI models, but right now the success is not nearly as high as, it's not as valuable training data as actually just human-produced data, because it's essentially, you know, the snake eating its own tail. It's like if you just talk to yourself all the time. And they're running out, so January 22, and hit November 30th, 2022, you will run out of like the purely human-like data sets. And then you will start training on synthetic data, whether it's the Reddit posts, whether it's Wikipedia, whether it's whatever it is. You won't be able to tell because these are able to operate on this scale because they are not a cleaned data set, right? Like that's how they're so huge. There is not intentionality going into which data is added to the training model, which is why they're able to improve so exponentially. So there's this worry about continued improvement, which once again is not me saying that like it will never get better. It's just that the idea that 3 was so much better that came before, and 4, as the second presenter really did a great job showing, was so much better than 3 at like so many tasks. The idea that this like rate of improvement, that GPT-5 will be as better than 4 as 4 was at 3, at some point there's a worry because data guzzling AI companies, the internet is too small. So OpenAI just cut a deal with Reddit, right, to let them like keep scraping their data because much of the internet has already been scraped. A lot of major websites have stopped the scraping, which you can do through code in your actual web page. There's issues about copyright infringement, so what can be found into these models. And so it's kind of like just a reminder as we talk about these things, whether we think about them in pedagogy or our own research or whatever, that it is not an automatic improvement. And that there might be a consistent improvement, but it's doubtful, and that's also not really how the history of technology often works. You do not see just one massive jump after another, or else we'd have flying cars, right? So as you hit this data wall, increasingly it becomes harder and harder to find purely like human-based data to feed into these models. There's worries that the improvement will begin to slow and become much more incremental. Which does matter because like GPT-4 is really good at some things, but like it's not that amazing at a lot of other things. Like I said, go read a screenplay written by GPT-4. Like, it's not that great yet. So transformative futures, like maybe, and I think almost certainly, as the presenters have discussed, like almost certainly, like this is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And it's really good for some things. It's like truly an amazing technology. But consistent linear progression, going back to this slide of, well, if it just keeps improving at this rate, like we'll have Skynet in whenever, there is no promise, and there are significant challenges, including like the challenges of synthetic data, that that line will continue to go up at that rate. Like it will continue to go up. But I would say it's pretty unlikely, and if you actually read the discourses from these companies and some of the deals they're trying to strike, they know, pretty unlikely that it will continue to go up because of the challenges of you might never have as good a pure data set to learn from, because once you hit GPT-3 and then all of a sudden you have a data set that has GPT-3 all over it. And then you start running into synthetic data like learning issues. So yeah, that's my talk. Just a reminder that one, don't just use AI because it's cool. And two, don't expect technological improvement to be linear. And that GPT-3 and 4 are massive improvements on what came before. But that does not mean that it is automatic, that things will continue to improve at the same pace.
Hey Jordan, that was a fantastic talk. So I'm interested in like synthetic media, deepfakes and things like this, and I wonder, is this true just for GPT-4 and that type of generative AI, or is it also true for AI-generated images, videos, things like that? Because of course we've got this thing with like GANs, so they're learning from, it's learning all the time and getting better and better.
So I haven't studied, but I would imagine that for like deepfakes and things like that, you would run into kind of the same synthetic data problem. I think one of the differences there might be like, for like image generating models, I'm not sure. I don't think their data sets are as comprehensive, so I bet there's more room to grow, if that makes sense, compared to like GPT-4 and just like the massive amount of data. I'd imagine there's still more data to like scrape. But yeah, once you hit a point where 50% of YouTube is deepfakes, and you've trained up to that point, and then you're training deepfakes on deepfakes, yeah, you will run into like somewhat of a synthetic data problem. And there's different opinions from computer scientists about how successful synthetic data can be in training. Some think it will be disastrous. Some think it's a problem that can be solved. It's something companies are paying a lot of money to be solved because they realize this problem, this data wall is coming. So I mean, the future will tell. But yeah, I think at some point it would be just as true for image generation once the data becomes generated by the platform itself. It's like if you only read your own writing.
Cool.
Yeah, I've read something about this kind of like AI trained on its own data, etc. I read there was a rather nice conception of it. They described it as like the Habsburg jaw. So like the kind of inbred family that kind of went on the children. They've got gigantic jaws out here. And that was a nice concept, except you could see the Habsburg jaw in somebody who's inbred. And the problem, I think, is, or is it, this is my question, will we be able to see inbred AI? Because at the moment on TikTok, I'm just getting reformed, artificially intelligent kind of images all the time. And the people, I think, who are going for that either don't care or don't see what they're doing, you know.
So I don't think it will be, so as like improvement slows, I don't think it will be as, it won't be some hugely noticeable, like, just the systems crashing into nonsense. Though there are some computer scientists who have made that argument. I think it's more likely we'll see just it not getting better at the rate that it has. That you might be seeing pretty similar TikTok videos 4 years from now. Whereas, like, those TikTok videos you're seeing that are artificially like generated are so much better than the ones you were seeing 2 years from now. So I think it's more a slowing than like a complete like disaster of just, and if it doesn't get that much, and it probably will get better, but if it doesn't get like that, there is still a cap on it right now. Like, there are still things that it is great for and things that it is not as good for. And there's a tech discourse, right, that, well, the things that it maybe doesn't do as well, it will be able to in the future, because look how faster it's gotten better in the past. And just, yeah, that's not automatic, right? It's not automatic that we get Skynet, or that we get the Matrix, or whatever. Like, it's not automatic that it improves at that rate.
Jordan, I agree with what you say. I believe we'll be able to see, for linguistic generation, we'll be able to see that models have been training on themselves, on artificial data, because the language will become more stereotypical. And for essay writing, we see it already. We see this stereotypical turn of phrase.
Oh, yeah.
We will see them, these funny verbs, you know, that are coming back again and again and again. This is the model for training on essays. And essays are generated by very stereotypical things, okay? So essays trained on essays are generating very stereotypical, linguistically stereotypical language. I don't know, Cornelia, if it's the linguistic term, but it's an impoverished language. So when it's going to be trained really on mostly artificial data, we may see a reduction in the variability of use of words.
For sure. So yeah, like on that point, there are phrases that people have done analyses that generative AI uses way more frequently than humans do.
Yeah, but then it poses a massive question. It's about how we define things and then knowledge. So the risk is an impoverishment of knowledge and how we define things. So I'm on the side of the pessimists regarding that, but because it would lead to an impoverishment of how we name things, how we define things, and we all know it's critical.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, it can also lead, so there's also a backlash right now, I don't know if you've noticed, a bunch of companies have started releasing ads, products that specifically say not AI generated. Right? Like, it's also become like almost, I've seen it like pop up more and more in the last even 3 weeks, this kind of reverse of like, it's become its own marketing term to be like, this is handcrafted ad copy. But like, I mean, it has, like if you Google it, and so like, I do think that impoverishment of knowledge, but like, people who want to find different types of content, like, they can. It's just that most people probably don't care enough, right? They don't care enough. But I don't know that those people were the ones who were going to be like adding deeply to our language anyways. I mean, like, if you're just gonna believe like any TikTok video, but like, no, but I do think like there could be, if you do hit a point where it is learning from a huge chunk of synthetic data, because to be clear, it can't tell what is synthetic data. There are stories of professors asking ChatGPT if their student cheated. ChatGPT is not designed for that. That's a terrible use of it. It was never meant to do that. But I do think, yeah, you could run into like a doubling down on certain phrases, which could change language, or just could become like really easy, obvious markers. I mean, there are already some, like someone did analysis of the use of delve in academic abstracts. So yeah, not just students cheating, by the way. Use of delve, which is a stupid word that like no one ever uses, but in academic well, people use it, it's a fine word, but you wouldn't use it like over and over again. It's not like the most normal word. And someone did analysis of academic abstracts in, I forget which scientific field, and the number of abstracts that had the word delve into it had gone up significantly, which is clearly people using ChatGPT to use. So yeah, if it starts learning from a lot of text that also uses delve or the other phrases it uses, then that could be definitely kind of like that rat eating its own tail. And this is a problem like people are working on, like they know it's a problem, like they are trying to get better at training models on synthetic data. Like OpenAI is very invested in this because they know that like that data wall is coming, which is why they're striking deals with like Reddit and things like that to make sure that they have that open access to data. Yeah.
Hi, thank you, and everyone else for the talks. Kind of relating to comments on deepfakes and also knowledge what's been produced. I was wondering if it relates, or maybe if it doesn't relate to saying that the data more, is the impact of false narratives or misinformation, disinformation, manipulated texts, and if those keep on being added to, well, the algorithm, and they keep on being reproduced, how can we define what is truth? That's something I would also talk about today. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that. Is that also a risk you see in the data wall, or do you think that the data will be so big that it will still be able to filter that out?
Well, I mean, it's already a problem because it's trained on human data. So humans are not great. So like there's a lot of like, I mean, so ChatGPT is partially a trained data set. Like when they first released it, like they kind of released it like this AI thing. But it's partially trained and it has a lot of guardrails that they put in to like prevent certain types of answers, certain topics. Because people have found when you do unsupervised like large language model training, it goes bad in a hurry. Like Microsoft released one based on Twitter data. I think it was using the N-word in like within about 6 hours or something like that. But ChatGPT is a trained data set. Like there are a lot more humans involved in ChatGPT than many people would think, which is why like if you ask it a politically charged question, at least in the US, you often get very bland answers. And that's not by mistake. That's like very intentionally like designed into the system. So there's already a lot of misinformation in any kind of data set because humans are wrong all the time and humans lie all the time. Now, will it produce more misinformation than humans? I mean, I don't know. Humans are already pretty good at producing misinformation, so it's not like humans are inherently more trustworthy than like ChatGPT. Like, during the 2016 election in the US, like 8 of the 10 most shared stories on Facebook in the months from September to November leading up to the election were fake. And they were stupidly fake. Like the Pope endorses Trump. Like, I mean, like just, no, but they were like really low energy posts that get shared over and over again. And so I do think like that could be a problem, but I also think humans are already bad at that, so there's already a lot of misinformation in the data set. So I wouldn't assume that necessarily having a larger synthetic data set would make it less trustworthy. Because I don't think humans are that trustworthy. So a pure data set does not mean you're necessarily going to get great stuff all the time because humans lie.
Joanna.
Yeah, I'm slightly worried about asking this question because this may reveal how little I know about ChatGPT and so on. But as far as I understand, at the moment, this data wall is about it learning knowledge. And I think that what Phil was talking about before, we are coming to the moment that it may be learning processes. So rather than doing the same thing on a loop, it will be learning how humans are doing it and maybe going in that direction.
So I don't think we're there. So once you got to a point where like you really were able to learn outside of your own data set, then you would be getting to a point of like artificial, once you can learn outside your own data set. So it has gotten much better at doing processes, much better at, like it's just gotten much, much better. But what you're talking about where it can get to where it's like learning outside of things in its data set, that would be where you got to what like Sam Altman and the people in Silicon Valley call AGI, which is kind of what the popular understanding of artificial intelligence is from sci-fi. But once you got to where you were learning outside of a data set that you were trained on, then at that point I mean, I don't know, sentience and consciousness are such like big words, but at that point, like, right, you're kind of conscious, like once you can learn outside of a data set. I don't think it's there yet, though. Like, it's gotten better at learning processes and things like that from its own data. I don't think it's gotten to a point where it's learning outside its own data set. Once you got to that, you'd need like the robot rights and like all of that stuff that people are talking about.
David, don't go big.
Yeah, which we might get to. It's just, I don't think we will get there by 2028 because I don't think, lines don't keep going up at the same rate in much of the history of technology. There are exceptions, like Moore's Law, for example, but like, there are more cases of like, you know, massive improvements followed by much more incremental improvements.
This might be a bit more of a fringe idea now, but is there, as you said, it's going to start living in its own data with like creative industries pushing back on AI. You've got stuff like Nightshade, where people are purposely uploading images to poison the well.
Oh,
So
that's another, yeah.
What are the like future implications of that?
I mean, the future implications of that could be serious. So on Reddit, there are subreddits people have been created just to post nonsense, to flood it, because they're pissed that Reddit cut a deal with OpenAI, because OpenAI is now having to cut deals with companies, and Reddit's a massive amount of data. And there are subreddits that have been created to just post nonsense as kind of a protest to feed nonsense into the system. And I mean, I think if that happened on scale,
Yeah.
now it would have to happen on a large scale, but if that happened on scale, like, that would be a problem. So Google's AI that they released that is terrible compared to like ChatGPT. So they've gotten caught already just repeating Reddit shitposts that were jokes. Like they have a recipe for peanut butter and glue sandwich that was from a Reddit post. Now their AI is so much worse than ChatGPT, and now they make me like, when I do a Google search, I have to like wait for it to complete, and it's not a product that should have been released.
Yeah.
I was doing a DIY project before I left for Europe, and I was trying to figure out how to get a really broken old nail from an old board. And I kept Googling it, and it kept like making me wait for 3 paragraphs on how to like use nail polish remover, and I was like, oh, I hate this so much. But that's like Google. ChatGPT is much better than that. I mean, if it were to happen on scale, but the scale would have to be pretty large.
Yeah.
But there are subreddits just devoted to people posting wrong answers and nonsense as a kind of like grassroots protest against Reddit licensing its data to these training models.
Fantastic. We will stop there. So, many thanks to Jordan.
Thank you all, and thank you to all the other presenters. That was fascinating.
Right.
echo that. And yeah, please help yourself to lunch.